I haven't recorded a video in a very long time, and I feel like it's pertinent if I come back with an extremely controversial video talking about white genocide. I'm thinking about this rather interesting topic, which is white genocide, and it has been discussed and it came up in a meeting between the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and the President of South Africa. But I don't want to talk about the genocide that's going on in Africa or the alleged genocide. I haven't gone into that. People say Trump lied, people say Trump didn't lie. I've got no clue. But I'm going to talk about the situation in Western civilization as a whole and the situation regarding the white race as a whole, because I think it's important to do it. There are very few mainstream platforms that are talking about this important piece of the puzzle, because whether you agree or disagree with the idea that Europe should be mainly white and America should be mainly white, you can't deny the fact that whites are making significantly less children than they used to. I mean, this is an undeniable fact, which then leads to a self-inflicted genocide, which is what I'm going to talk about and the reasons why that is. So let's start by talking about this. What do I mean by white genocide? I mean the following. If white people keep having as few children as they are having currently, within the next maybe 70 or 100 years, we will be far fewer than we are now. And within the next 2 or 3 centuries, maybe, I don't know, I've not done the math, I've not looked at charts, I'm just going to talk about the things I know, without having looked at anything. But if we keep going down this path in a few centuries, which is a very short period of time, given how long humans have existed, if we keep going down this path, whites will disappear. So I think that white genocide is totally real, and I think it's going on. Now, the reason why it's not talked about enough is for 2 reasons, actually. There are 2 reasons behind this. One, the fact that anything that is restrictionist with regard to ethnically contaminating a country which has been mainly white is deemed as Nazi. Which means, if I go on and say Europe should be white, mainstream media says that that's far-right extremism. So you have that sort of deterrence from the media apparatus and information apparatus as a whole that is keeping people away from stating remotely patriotic and isolationist things defending the white race. So that's the first reason. And it's a very important one, and it's very effective because there are very few people that, in spite of being called white supremacists, neo-Nazis, fascists, stand up and say, I'm not a fascist, I'm not a neo-Nazi. I'm just saying that I believe that Europe should be white. And there's nothing wrong with that, frankly. I do believe Europe should be 98% white, if I'm being honest with you. And I don't think I'm a Nazi. Now, if any person in the world wants to call me a Nazi, and none of you ever has, because I think you're very reasonable people, then I'm fine with being called a Nazi. I mean, I just could care less. I find it fun. Because if you don't find things like that fun and entertaining, then you end up hurting yourself for things which are totally false. But that's the first reason why this genocide is not talked about. The other reason is because it is self-inflicted. When we think of genocides, we think of a populace, we think of a group of people trying to erase from earth a race, an ethnicity. The most famous genocide in history is the Holocaust. Why is it so talked about? There is the conspiratorial side, which is saying that people with very strong ties to the state of Israel and the Jewish ethnicity run the media, and therefore that's the only thing it's talked about. And that is, from my very basic understanding, to some extent true. I'm not going to dispute it, because there are loads of very influential Jewish people running media and those sorts of things. So totally true. But irrespective of that, the reason why the Holocaust is so talked about is because it was a genocide inflicted upon Jews by other populace. So that's why it's so talked about. And usually genocides are things which are inflicted by other populace, by other people. It's not self-inflicted. Has there ever been a self-inflicted genocide other than the white genocide we're going through right now? I'm not totally sure, because I truthfully don't know history that well. So I don't know whether there has ever been an event significant enough to be labeled and considered as self-inflicted genocide. I don't know if there has ever been anything like that other than the genocide we're going through now. But the Holocaust is so talked about, and also all the other genocides, because it wasn't self-inflicted and it was something that other people did to try to erase from history another race. Very simply. So that's why we don't talk about white genocide. The media, that is doing fear-mongering and using labels, not just the media, I mean the whole information apparatus. They call you crazy if you say one thing, they call you far right, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic, and all of these names. If you say whites should have a country, I think that's the way it should be, and we should deport people and we shouldn't let anyone in anymore because we don't want any more foreigners coming into the country, which is a perfectly reasonable and respectable position to hold. I don't think there's anything wrong with not wanting any migrant in our countries. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, frankly. And also, at the same time, I'm going to make a more general and more broad point. I do believe in my heart that we shouldn't demonize people for having opinion, even though they're extreme, maybe, even though they could be extreme, but truly extreme. Not saying I don't want any more immigrants in Europe. I think we've had enough. I believe that's a very reasonable position. We can call that right-wing, but it's still reasonable. Or you can have a more left-wing position, which is like, we need immigrants because we're not making enough children. I disagree with that position for the very simple reason that is, if we import people from other nations, then our nation is not our nation anymore, is it? When you walk through London, do you feel like it's London? Honestly, if you've been to London the last few years, it doesn't feel like London. And I'm saying this in the least racist way possible, but it's just a feeling you get. It feels like India or Pakistan. And I'm not saying this in an offensive way, I'm just saying it's the way it feels. London feels a very specific way, and it depends on culture, and it's related to culture, which implies, in my opinion, given that a culture is related to race, which implies that it's also related to race. I mean, this is my personal point of view. Very simple point of view. I mean, I'm explaining this in the least complicated way possible so that you understand. But I think all of you are very smart people, so there is no problem. We've gone through the reasons why what genocide is not talked about, and we've gone through the reasons why I consider what's going on with white people a genocide right now. And we've also gone through the reasons why I think that this genocide is self-inflicted. I haven't mentioned them specifically, but it's very simple for anyone to understand why I believe that this is a self-inflicted genocide. The reason is very simple. It's whites who are not having enough children. White people are not having enough children. We're having children at rhythms that cannot be sustained if we want our countries, if we want our race not to lose people as time goes on. I don't know what's the average birth rate of white people. If I had to throw a guess, less than 150. And I'm probably correct. How on earth can we reproduce, and how on earth can we survive? How on earth can our race survive if we don't make more children? It's mathematically impossible. And as my teachers very well know, maths ain't my strength. So if I'm telling you this, it means that we cannot sustain this anymore. How do we solve white genocide? I am not even entirely sure we can solve it, but the very simple way we can solve this problem is by having as many kids as possible. Now, this is a complex thing. for many reasons. Many reasons. It's not as simple as people would expect. First and foremost, as time goes on, kids are more expensive and life is more expensive. So an average 20-year-old person today, or even an average 15-year-old person who's still too young to have kids, even though some people have had kids at 15, and I'm not totally against teenage pregnancy. I'm not totally against it. Be careful with that totally. In some cases, most of them, I'm against it. But if someone feels ready, I'm for it. Now, I'm against having an abortion because having a kid at 15 is inconvenient. Now, I'm totally against that. But we will have time to discuss those two opinions. I've just thrown them there to light up some fires and some flames. I'm pretty sure they're going to appreciate it. There is a lot to talk about in this video. And I hope there's going to be time to cover all the issues that must be covered. But as I was saying, we should have more children, but having children is more expensive nowadays because prices are spiking, they're going up, things are more expensive, and an average 20-year-old person thinks, well, I can't even afford to pay the rent, I don't know if I'm going to have a kid. It's not possible. Before, 80 years ago, 50 years ago, the man could work, or one of the two people in the house could work, and easily have a house, 2 cars, and have 7 kids. Now, if just the man, the husband works, and the wife stays at home to have children, you can't pay the rent, you can't do anything, so women are forced to work. So women work, whether it's willingly or unwillingly. In some cases, it's one, and in some cases, it's the other. So the fact that prices are going up is a problem. And I do understand perfectly that 20-year-old people think, well, I wonder if I'm going to have a kid. At least if I have a kid, it's going to be at 40. So that's why we get 1 or 2 kids on average from white people, from white couples. That's the reason. Because if they have kids, in some cases they do not, they have them at 25, wish it was 25, 35, at best, 40, 45. So that's why we ain't reproducing anymore. That's why we're dying, collapsing. This is something which is not talked about, but it's a genuine collapse. Guys, the sheer magnitude of this self-inflicted genocide is unlike anything in modern history with regard to race. We're talking about a whole race of people which makes up 7% of the world population. So do the math, and that's like 500 million people. We're talking about 500 million people approximately disappearing within, what, a few centuries? 1,000 years at best? Like, do you understand the sheer magnitude of this? And I'm saying this irrespective of how highly you consider the white race to be. There are some people who sustain that whites are shit and they suck. There are other people who believe that whites are awesome. But irrespective of that, we need to understand the sheer magnitude of how unprecedented this is. We're talking about 500 million people disappearing in 1,000 years at best, because I think it's fewer than that if they keep going down this path. This is unlike anything in history. And the problem is that I don't think it's savable. Because as I said, prices keep going up. And rightfully, 20, 25-year-old people say, well, I can't afford to have a kid. Do you know how much a kid costs on average? Do you know how much? I read a statistic, maybe it's wrong, but on average, to raise a kid in Italy, I think, from 0 to 18 years old, is 200,000 euros. $200,000 more or less. Well, how can you pull it off? Someone thinks. And in that way, young people are certainly not inclined to having kids, and I understand them perfectly. Now, the other thing I want to talk about here is the impact of the feminist movement and the anti-patriarchy movement has had upon the decline of birth rates among white people. As you know, this is a very controversial topic, but frankly, is there anything I say which is not controversial? Very few things. So I am used to this, it's fine, no problem. But some people say, I partially do to some extent, that feminism and this whole idea of the independent woman working and her independent career has contributed to the decline of the birth rates amongst white people. And this is plausible logically. For the very simple reason that if you have one man working and one woman staying at home, raising kids and having kids, you're gonna have more kids than if you have a woman and a man working and the woman sometimes taking breaks to have kids. Like, physically, let's think about this. Even if a woman still has lots of children and still gets to have leave because she's pregnant and whatever, it's way more difficult for her to have kids and work and do all of that stuff at the same time than it is for her to just stay at home and have kids and raise them. So the shift there has been with regard to women working has been crucial. Has it been good? I'm not going to cover this topic because it's a long one. I ain't got time. I don't want to make this video 45 minutes. But the truth, as I said, is that this change in the household has resulted in whites having fewer children. Because in less developed nations, like African nations and Asian nations and all that stuff, women work, or at least women concentrate more on having kids than they do in the West. Now a woman thinks about all of these things, the career, pursuing a career, getting a job, whatever. And for that reason, we have way fewer children. Can you stop that phenomenon? It's very hard to do it. I frankly think it's very hard to do it. So that's why I'm saying it's almost irreversible. I don't know if this can be saved. I can think of polygamy as a solution, but that's very much against Western civilization, or at least against the values it was built upon. When I think of Western civilization, at least in the recent years, then thousands of years ago, it certainly was different. As I said, I don't have much knowledge of history. My knowledge of history is little, so I can't speak in detail about certain topics and the history of the ethnicities that have lived in Italy, whatever. But I can tell you that the first things I can think of when I think about Western civilizations, and by Western civilizations I mean Western Europe and America mainly, that has been basically conquered by Europe, so it's as if it were Europe to some extent in this discussion specifically. When I think of the West, I think of Christianity and white people. Those are the things that I think of. And as I said, it's very hard for me to believe that we're gonna have so many men being polygamous. Sounds hard to me. It's against Christianity, Catholicism, and those sorts of things. It's just a man and a woman. It's against the principles of the religion the West was founded upon. So I don't think it's gonna happen. I don't think it's gonna happen at levels big enough for the birth rate collapse to invert into a birth rate grow. So frankly, I don't think that's a solution. What could be the other solution? To encourage people to have kids, which is sort of against what, in my opinion, the whole media and society has done. Media and society, in my opinion, from my understanding, from the feelings I have, are sort of, you shouldn't have so many kids, you shouldn't have kids when you're young, you shouldn't have kids, you shouldn't have kids. Yes, you should have kids. It's fine to have kids at 18 years old. There's no problem. It's wonderful. Oh, you're too young. I don't think it's true. In some cases it is, in some it is not. To sum up, because this has been a very complicated video and I have talked about many stuff, white genocide is not talked about because it is self-inflicted and no other populace has been trying to lead whites to be destroyed, so it's self-inflicted. And the other reason why it is not spoken about, it's because anything isolationist with regard to ethnicity, to the white ethnicity and the white race, and anything that is in favor of an isolation of whites in a country, and therefore in favor of restrictionism, of contamination, of ethnicity, is deemed as far-right, white supremacist and Nazi by the conglomerate that runs the information world. Therefore, it is very difficult to have masses of people brave enough and large enough to stand up and maybe explicitly say things which they believe in. Because frankly, guys, I believe that the amount of white people that want a total moratorium on immigration and want their countries to be ethnically white is way larger than what charts will ever show, because these people are afraid of saying it, and I don't blame them for that. Thank you very much for listening. Let me know your thoughts. I understand that some of this rhetoric is very similar to neo-Nazi stuff, but it's fine. I say things the way I think they should be said. I say things the way I can say them. I'm not a very good public speaker, as you can see. I'm not bad either, but I could be way better. So it's normal for me to maybe sometimes buy into some far-right rhetorical sentences. Let's just leave it to that, and I don't want to make it any more complex, because if I make it more complex, everything goes to shit. So thank you very much for listening. Subscribe, hit the like button, comment down below, and see you soon, guys. Bye-bye. Take care.